A common street snack that you see in Mexico are these empanadas, little pastry parcels filled often with a savoury filling, sometimes with a sweet, and that's what I'm going to do today. I'm going to fill some with pecan and chocolate, two great ingredients from Mexico. So I'm making a sweet short crust pastry, which is a good one to start with if you haven't done a lot of pastry making because it's really forgiving. It's got butter, flour, iced water, 1 egg yolk and a little bit of sweetener, and we'll use icing sugar. So we've got 100 grams of butter in there, and to that I'm going to add around about 1.25 cups of plain flour. A pinch of salt always helps. I'm just going to use around about a tablespoon of this icing sugar. And the trick is to move relatively quickly because we don't want that butter to melt too quickly, and just put it on a pulse. Whoop. Good, so that's starting to look like the breadcrumb look that I'm after. Take 1 egg yolk, I'll separate that. And now just pulsing it, we'll add some of this iced water, which is just water with an ice cube in it just to keep everything nice and cold. So just... And the whole trick with keeping pastry as cold as possible is that it just makes it a beautiful, tender, good, snappy, crisp pastry at the end, not a kind of tough pastry. And really what I'm looking for here is, can I pinch this between my fingers? And it looks like I can do that, so I know it's ready. So always tend on the dry side, and even though wet pastry is slightly easier to work with, it doesn't actually cook as well. Now all I need to do is just bring this in carefully so it's one cohesive block. You don't need to knead it, just bring it in. Don't worry if it's a bit crummy. And I'm liking that I can still see little flecks of butter. That's exactly what you really want in a good pastry. So now I need to just wrap it up, pop it in the fridge to rest the flour. So now I can start to prepare my filling. Now these pecan halves, I'm just going to toast these in a dry pan. And I've just got these on a medium heat, but I don't want to leave them because nuts with a lot of oil in them, they tend to really burn quite quickly. And I love the flavour of pecan. They're native to Mexico. So this, together with the chocolate, two classic ingredients from Mexico. Oh, they smell good and they look good, so I reckon they're probably done. I'm just going to let those cool down before I chop them. Chocolate. Good to use a really bitter chocolate for this. I've gone for 70% cocoa, but anything above sort of 60% would be really great just to give you that nice bitter flavour. Reminds me of when my dad made these little parcels and he used Rose's chocolates in them. I did it with confidence, almost pulled it off. And it's good to be really well prepared when you're working with pastry because I want to work quite quickly once I start to roll it out so that it doesn't sort of heat up and start falling apart on me. So I'm being very organised getting all this done beforehand. I think my pastry is going to be ready by now. It's rested for long enough. Let's have a little look. Yes, that looks good. I'm just going to sprinkle a little bit of flour just to make sure that my rolling pin doesn't stick to it. Not a lot of pressure is required, just sort of quick strokes from the middle outwards. And if it starts to crack around the edges, that's fine. Short crust does that sometimes. Don't freak out. And you see how easy it is if you use a bit of baking paper, then you're not having to turn your board or turn the pastry on a floured surface. You can just turn it on top of your board. I think that is thin enough. Now my special teacup that's got a really thin rim on it, which is excellent for blocking out my little circles. Press. Oh, it always reminds me of being a kid and doing those first little baking adventures in the kitchen. Great. Now I just need to moisten the edges by using a little pastry brush and some water just to help the edges to seal. All you need is water. You don't need any egg yolk and milk or any of that sort of thing. Good to do maybe 2 or 3 at a time. A little bit of ingredients here. Some of my nut, some of my chocolate. And bear in mind that chocolate and other things when they cook, they do tend to kind of grow in volume. So even though that might not look like a lot, trust me. Just slightly stretch that over and then make sure you've got a really good seal there. And your little empanada can just go on a lined baking tray. And again, I'm trying to work quite quickly so that my pastry doesn't have too long to soften out at room temperature. These just make the greatest little snacks to go with a little cup of coffee maybe, take on a little picnic. They really travel well. Don't they look cute? So these are going into an oven at 180 degrees for 10 to 15 minutes. What I'm looking for is a golden brown look on the pastry, and then I know that it's cooked and that'll all be melting inside.
Let's take a ride on, let's take a ride. Let's take a ride on, let's take a ride. Let's take a ride on, let's take a ride.
empanadas should be ready now, so let's have a look. Oh, they're great. Golden brown. None of them have burst, so it's all going to be melting and beautiful in there. You can just smell the sweetness of them, that sweet pastry. And a dusting of icing sugar will just really bring them up, adding a bit of contrast as well as flavour. A few little flowers. I just like to add a little bit of colour to a plate. Oh, and if you break these open, oh, just got that nut and that melted chocolate in there. It's great. You've got that bitter chocolate taste in there and the crunch of the pecan and the sweet homemade pastry encasing it. Oh, gorgeous.